In the full Republic breakdown, the Secutor took over the carrier role the Venator had defined. The Acclamator was its predecessor. The Arquitens served alongside it in escort and patrol. Every single ship in this series circled back to the Venator as a reference point, and the Venator never got its own segment. That changes now. The Venator-class Star Destroyer wasn't just the Republic's most famous warship. It was the architectural standard that defined what Republic naval power meant, the center of gravity around which every other ship in the fleet was organized. Understanding it explains why each of those other ships existed at all. The Republic, by its own constitution, wasn't supposed to have a standing military. In the years before the Clone Wars, defense of the galaxy rested on a small judicial forces structure. Enforcement vessels, not warships. No capital ships, no fleet doctrine. The assumption was that the Senate and the Jedi would handle whatever needed handling. The Separatist crisis complicated that assumption considerably. As the crisis deepened and emergency powers expanded, the Republic began doing something it couldn't announce publicly: building a war fleet. The judicial forces lacked large warships, and the gap was obvious to anyone paying attention. Kuat Drive Yards won the contract. The project remained clandestine. In the Legends continuity, the designer credited for the Venator is Lira Blissex, who created it as a medium-weight, versatile, multi-role warship, one that could handle capital ship combat while doubling as a carrier platform for starfighter wings. The price tag was approximately 59 million Republic credits. Most Republic citizens had no idea the ship was being built. The Venator was, in a very real sense, an answer to a question the Republic wasn't allowed to ask yet. When the First Battle of Geonosis opened on 22 BBY, and the Republic's new military went public in a single afternoon, it was the Acclamator-class assault ship that debuted. Landing 12 clone legions on the surface, ATTEs and LAAT gunships rolling out of its ventral bays. The Venator wasn't there. Production commenced shortly after Geonosis, and the class reached its first confirmed combat deployment only days or weeks later at Christophsis. The war started without it, then became inseparable from it. In the 3 years between 22 and 19 BBY, hundreds of Venator-class Star Destroyers were built and deployed across the galaxy. That's how they looked to the people beneath them. Massive, wedge-shaped presences occupying the sky above whatever engagement was unfolding. By the Battle of Coruscant, over 1,000 of them ringed the capital. The opening of Revenge of the Sith is the definitive image of what that looked like from the outside. Hole after hole, filling the space above Coruscant. Hundreds of fighter trails crossing between them, while a battle rolled across the entire orbital plane. That fleet was composed predominantly of Venators. That sequence is the Republic's naval power at its absolute peak, made visible in a single unbroken shot. A fleet of Venators is what the Republic at war looked like, which makes the ship's absence from its own dedicated breakdown across an entire series of Republic fleet coverage the most conspicuous gap in the compilation. At 1,137 meters, the Venator occupied a specific tactical niche, long enough to carry a small army's worth of equipment, fast enough on a Class 1.0 hyperdrive to pursue blockade runners across 60,000 light-years of effective range, and one of the largest capital ships capable of atmospheric operations. It could actually land on a planetary surface to load and unload troops directly. 7,400 crew ran it. Another 2,000 troops could be berthed as passengers. Cargo capacity reached 20,000 tons. The armament looks modest at first read. 8 dual DBY-827 heavy turbolaser turrets formed the main battery. In precision long-range tracking mode, each DBY-827 could hit a target vessel at 10 light minutes distance. In close combat, those turrets rotated in 3 seconds. The battery had 7 power settings, from a surgical strike to a vaporizing blow, and when the Venator diverted full reactor output to its turbolasers, a flotilla of 3 or 4 could breach the shields of a Trade Federation battleship. Beyond the heavy turrets, 2 medium dual turbo laser cannons, 52 point defense laser cannons, 4 proton torpedo tubes, and 6 tractor beam projectors. 8 heavy turbo lasers on a ship that size isn't an imposing armament. The Republic at War sourcebook describes the Venator as bearing a modest armament for its size, leaving most of the space within it available for hangar capacity. That sentence is the entire design brief. The guns weren't the point. The hangars were. At the bow, 2 enormous armored doors could split apart to reveal a half-kilometer-long dorsal flight deck. When that deck was open, the Venator could launch hundreds of fighters in a single wave, rapidly, in formation, without the bottleneck of a conventional hangar bay. The vulnerability was real. An open flight deck reduced effective armor coverage, and after enough Venators were lost to enemy fire through that exposed corridor, the design was abandoned on successor classes. The Imperial class has no equivalent feature. Its sealed profile reflects that lesson directly. But the Venator's pilots and commanders accepted the risk because the tactical upside was substantial. Nothing in the Separatist fleet launched fighters at the rate a Venator could when both its bow deck and its side hangar bays were operating simultaneously. Some captains in the Open Circle fleet had SPHA turbolaser walkers positioned near the ventral hangar opening, at Anakin Skywalker's suggestion, to cover the ship while its doors were open. Those weapons saw notable use at Coruscant. Now to the fighter complement, the number that separates the Venator from everything that followed it. Legends records a typical Republic Venator carrying 420 fighters, 192 V-Wing or V-19 Torrent starfighters, 192 Eta-2 Actis-class interceptors, and at least 36 ARC-170 starfighters. That figure includes all small craft in the hangar. More conservative configurations, reflecting specific operational loadouts, cite 92 fighters. What both figures confirm is that the Venator was designed with a hangar volume the Imperial fleet never replicated in a ship of comparable role. The 420 figure is the one that describes the Venator as its designers intended it, and it's the one that puts the subsequent carrier choices in sharpest relief. The fighter wing itself evolved across 3 years of the Clone Wars. Early engagements saw Venators flying V-19 Torrent interceptors and BTLBY wing bombers, the V-19 handling fleet defense, the Y-wings handling strike missions against heavier targets. By the war's midpoint, the ARC-170 had become the primary multi-role fighter, with V-wings filling the close escort role the V-19 had held. Same hull, updated air wing. That adaptability was part of the design's value. The Venator's hangars accommodated a range of starfighter types across the Clone Wars' shifting tactical requirements without structural modification. The dual bridge tower configuration followed from the dual role. The port tower housed the starfighter command bridge. The starboard tower was the helm and tactical command bridge. 2 separate command centers, because the Venator was managing 2 fundamentally different types of warfare simultaneously. Flagship Venators in flotillas were marked with red-painted conning towers to separate them from line ships. That dual-tower layout became an architectural precedent. You can trace its influence directly into the Secutor class and the Maelstrom-class battlecruiser that came after. There's one word that captures what the Venator was better than any of its official designations: battle carrier. Not quite a carrier, not quite a battleship. Both, simultaneously. And the hybrid identity wasn't a design compromise. It was the entire point. The Acclamator handled planetary assault. It debuted at Geonosis before the Venator had fired a shot, landing legions on the surface, getting ATTE walkers and clone troopers from orbit to the ground. That was its purpose. The Venator's purpose was orbital dominance and fighter projection. The division of labor was clean, and you could see it in operation across 3 years of the Clone Wars animated series. At Ryloth, Y-wing bombers flying from Venator hangars disabled the Separatist blockade ship's shields. Then Venator turbolaser batteries finished the targets. The bombers and the capital guns came from the same hull, and the Acclamator waited for the orbital engagement to clear before deploying its ground complement. Classic combined arms. Bombers soften, guns close, troops follow. The Venator coordinated the first two stages entirely on its own. The Arquitens-class light cruiser served as the Venator's screening element. Records from the Republic Navy's fleet operations confirm at least one engagement where a Venator and an Arquitens from Plo Koon's fleet were dispatched together as a response force. The Arquitens providing screening capability, the Venator the firepower concentration. The Arquitens RPG entry describes these ships as suited to escort convoys, support larger, heavier ships like carriers and battleships, cruise pickets, and other roles that require fast, independent ships. The Venator was the heavier ship being supported. The Arquitens was its guard dog. Then there are the ARC-170s, covered in the previous video in this series. At minimum, 36 flew from each Venator's hangars, and the connection between the two ships extended into the early Imperial period. Squadrons of ARC-170s were deployed from older generation Venator-class Star Destroyers to assist fleet actions even after the Empire had nominally moved on to TIE series fighters. Old hardware from old Doctrine, still operating in the margins of the New Order's fleet. The ARC-170 needed the Venator's hangar depth to extend its combat range across a system. The Venator needed the ARC-170's multi-role capability to project force beyond what capital guns alone could reach. Each made the other more effective, and the combination is exactly what the comment in this series described as devastating. Because it was. No primary Doctrine document formally names the Venator as the center element of Republic fleet formations, but the tactical record across 3 years of combat demonstrates it consistently. At Coruscant, over 1,000 Venators anchored the Republic defense of the capital. 3 Venators working in coordination reportedly damaged Grievous's Providence-class dreadnought badly enough to compromise the flagship engagement early in the battle. The ship that appeared in every notable fleet action carried the Jedi generals who commanded those fleets and launched the fighter wings that cleared orbital space before any other element could function. That ship was, in practice, the center of gravity. Jedi generals flew their flag from Venators so consistently that the ships earned a second name, Jedi cruisers. Anakin Skywalker's flagship was the Resolute. His and Obi-Wan Kenobi's Open Circle Fleet Venators flew the distinctive red Open Circle insignia that marked command ships within a flotilla. The connection between Jedi command authority and Venator hull was close enough that the Empire later viewed it as a liability, not tactical, but ideological. In operational reality, a 3-year galaxy-wide war stretched across thousands of systems meant most Venators deployed well below their theoretical 420 fighter maximum. Pilot availability, replacement parts, and supply chain distances all imposed limits on how full any given hangar actually was. The 420 figure represents what the ship was designed to carry, the potential that made it the standard everything else was measured against. The Clone Wars ended in 19 BBY. The Republic became the Empire in a single Senate session, and the Venators came with it. Ships still on production lines were absorbed directly into the Imperial Navy. Republic livery was stripped. The hulls went gray. That transition had already happened, in miniature, aboard a specific Venator on a specific day. Clone Wars Season 7 closes on the Tribunal. Ahsoka Tano is aboard when Order 66 is executed. The clones who had maintained the ship's corridors and flew from its hangars turn on the Jedi command structure they had served throughout the war. Rex fights against his own conditioning. The ship ultimately crashes on a moon. That wreckage, a Venator broken open on alien soil, its hull half buried, its hangar doors finally still, is the last image of the series. The final frame of the Clone Wars is the final frame of what the Venator represented. The Republic's warship, cracked open on a dead moon, carrying the debris of everything that died with the Republic it was built to defend. For the first several years after the Empire's founding, Venators continued in active service. Security cordons, flight training assignments alongside newer Star Destroyers, sector patrol duties in the Outer Rim. The Imperial Navy used several as flight schools for military pilots. Some flew ARC-170 squadrons into the early Imperial period, old hardware from old Doctrine still operating in the margins of the New Order. But the replacement process was already underway before those ships were decommissioned. The Star Wars Saga Edition RPG sourcebook states the reason directly. As icons of the Old Republic's military might, the Venators were politically unpopular with the Empire's new propaganda offices. The same source continues. Their use as starfighter carriers, with combat power distributed across hundreds of independent strike craft, didn't match well with the new Tarkin Doctrine. Tarkin Doctrine made fear the primary strategic instrument. Overwhelming capital firepower concentrated in a single hull, visible, monolithic, unmistakable, served that doctrine better than a battle carrier that distributed force across an entire fighter wing. The Empire wanted warships that looked like weapons of judgment. The Venator looked like something else entirely, a combined arms platform built for a war fought by people who believed they could win it cooperatively. The Secutor class fills the carrier role in the Imperial fleet. It's larger than the Venator at 2,200 meters, nearly double the length. Its confirmed fighter complement, per Legends sources, was 144 TIE series starfighters. Against the Venator's Legends figure of 420, that ratio is approximately 3-to-1, a ship twice as long, carrying roughly a third of the fighters. The Empire built a larger carrier and filled it with fewer strike craft. The Secutor also carries heavier armament than the Venator, 15 heavy turbolaser batteries versus the Venator's 8, but was itself described as relatively light in weapons output for a ship of its size. It kept one foot in the carrier role and moved the other toward the gun line. Neither the pure carrier capability the Venator embodied, nor the raw firepower of an Imperial-class Star Destroyer. The hybrid doctrine the Venator represented wasn't continued. It was diluted. The Imperial class completed the shift. Its turbolaser count dwarfed the Venator's 8 heavy turrets, 60 heavy batteries against 8. Its TIE fighters were fast and expendable, entirely dependent on their carrier, incapable of independent operation across a system. That was by design. TIEs were swarm weapons suited to a fleet doctrine that didn't anticipate peer opposition, a doctrine built on the assumption that no enemy could put enough fighters in space to challenge an ISD's point defense envelope. The RC-170 they replaced had been a capable independent operator, able to fight, scout, and travel across systems without carrier support. The doctrine that produced each fighter reflected the doctrine that produced the ship carrying it. The Republic had built for flexibility. The Empire built for mass and intimidation. Approximately 8 years after the Empire's founding, the Venator class was formally phased out. The process was gradual. Some were scrapped on planets like Braca, where the Scrapper Guild dismantled former Republic hardware for salvage. Others passed to criminal organizations, MOF private defense fleets, and fringe navies operating in the Outer Rim. A small number survived long enough to appear in engagements during the Galactic Civil War. The novel The Rise of Darth Vader marks the transition in a single line, describing a newly commissioned Star Destroyer as unlike its Venator-class predecessors, a product of the New Order. Predecessors, past tense. The Venator's era is over. The word that names it, predecessors, is the word the Empire used to close the file. The Venator wasn't underrated. It was never obscure. Every ship in this series was compared to it for one reason, because the comparison always revealed exactly what was traded away. A 3-year war that produced hundreds of these ships, a combined arms doctrine that made each of them the center of a self-contained battle group, a fighter capacity that no Imperial successor matched, and then a deliberate institutional choice to set all of that aside, for political optics and a tactical philosophy built on intimidation rather than flexibility. That's what was lost. Now you know exactly what it was worth. Subscribe for more stories like this.